Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. Welcome to the Momentum Flow, where ideas, innovations, and experiences create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders spot opportunities, spark innovation, and scale profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and keep the momentum flow going. Today's my guest is someone who has lived supply chain pressure from the inside out, Tim Scott. He is a former Naval Officer, former Chief Supply Chain Officer at Grocery Outlet, and now an advisor helping companies design resilient, tech-enabled supply chains that perform when it matters most. Tim has led transformations across companies of 5 billion to 30 billion enterprises, deliver over 80 million in cost savings, and scale operations through hypergrowth, automation, and digital innovation, especially in retail and logistics, where complexity is real and margins are really thin. Welcome to the Momentum Flow, Tim.
Hey, appreciate the invite. Thanks, Luis.
Right. So, Tim, you and I known each other for a while now, and we constantly cross paths in different environments, as you well know. So, to start, why don't you share a bit about your career journey from the Royal Canadian Navy, your early days in Nestle, Kraft, Mondelez, to then the retail side, right, with Metro and Grocery Outlet, and now you're a trusted supply chain advisor for corporations and startups. Share a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I think just what makes my journey interesting, having grown up in food and beverage, spending the front end of my career there, and then over the last decade or so in grocery retail, in a different seat at the same table, right? And so my entire career has been at that table in various different seats, and I have collected great points of view, great experiences, and some fantastic leadership opportunities along the way.
It's been quite a journey, no doubt about it. So, what keeps you going all along? What is that drive?
I've got a very strong customer-centric approach to business, and I think that drive for customer satisfaction is there. But I think most importantly, and is likely, a large part of my legacy as I've taken on different leadership roles, is spending time with the people, right? Developing the leadership teams, seeing, witnessing, nurturing the teams or the members, team leaders that become executive leaders. I've seen that.
Now, people that come with a military background, in your case, naval officer, that shaped you some way, right? How does that shape you in the way you lead supply chains and their complexity today?
It is a very unique background that I have, right? Having started off in the military, specifically the military academy. I learned how to follow very early on in my career, right? Various levels, degrees, positive and negative. Learning how to follow in those environments really had an impact in shaping how I lead, and getting very early experiences in leadership situations through those military exposures. I've carried through my entire career.
That's interesting because you mentioned follow, right? And in retail and logistics, are environments that things can go fast, can go wrong very fast. So is that something that your military background has helped you and shows up every day in your day about?
Yeah, I think, again, to survive in the military, right, you need to understand the objective, right? You need to make a plan. You need to really efficiently communicate to the team. And then you need to take that team over the hill, right? And I think our challenges every day in the supply chain really touch on a lot of those components, right? And as a leader, I draw on those.
So you're referencing there's always a lot of high pressure environment, right, on supply chain operations. And from your perspective, what separates leaders who create momentum from those who stall at it in these high pressure environments?
High pressure, very often experienced in retail. It's a 7 day, 24-hour a day experience. To your point about what's the difference that in creating momentum and separating strong leaders from average leaders, I think communication, right? It is how effective are you at communicating? Can you really drive down to the true message, keep it short, keep it focused, and then allow your team to align and mobilize. So
That's interesting because definitely communication is foundational in our profession. But how do you build from communicating to building high trust on the teams is different, right? Especially when you have speed, cost, and service are always competing priorities. So elaborate a little bit more on how you do that. What is your secret sauce on that?
yeah,
Communication.
high trust takes time to build. And I think, as I mentioned in the previous question, I think communication is foundational. So are you consistent? Are you clear? Right? Do you stop and consider the other opinions in the room where and when time affords you to do that? As I said, in retail, 24/7, it is always at a very, very fast clip. Sometimes you don't have time. So I think I think communication is probably the biggest. Um,
As I hear you say communication, you're definitely a good communicator because I've known you enough to know that you know when to speak, but you know when to hear. And a lot of listening is not, is a two-way communication is paramount. A lot of people are very good at speaking, but not at listening. So I know you're a good communicator. So now pivoting a little bit more towards, our experiences, right? So as you know, I've been in a career that I've been end to end, right? I've been planning, purchasing, manufacturing, logistics. You definitely went super deep in logistics, retail front. You're a lot richer and deeper in that than I ever was. So with that, that's your superpower. I will call it. And how does that those perspective, um, how does that experience shape you on the way you lead complex supply chains today?
you're right. The deep end of my pool is the logistics and the retail execution. I think um,
Or how do these experiences complement each other? Maybe that's better said.
again, good question. I think um, there's definitely correlation to a certain obsession around inventory, right? And all things inventory. So certainly being obsessed with how and where and when you need to shape that inventory pile and the tools you use to influence that. Some of those are direct, and some of those are very much indirect, and requires different skill sets to shape and influence. So I think that's how I'd answer that question is one of the key pieces is an obsession around inventory and the critical requirements to influence and shape that.
Let me probe on the from your experience. So, where do you think companies most often, more frequently underestimate the logistics complexity that professionals like you, on certain moment, have to deal with? Because at least I've seen a lot of, you know, take things for granted. So where do you think is the biggest gap there?
I think it's an interesting question, right? I could answer it, continuing on with the inventory conversation, but I think I'll answer it from a different side. I think, one conversation I constantly find myself in these days is the transportation legs that support this inventory. There is a lot, there still is, a lack of depth of understanding of what is driving, right? Whether it's the T0 leg, the T1 leg, the last mile leg, right? These transportation elements that continue to be very high single digit um, costs as a percentage of sales across most businesses, right? There are key decision makers across many businesses that are still very confused with what's going on, what are the drivers. So I think that's how I'd answer that question.
So now that you have a seat at the table on decision making, or when a logistic lead gets at seat at the table, you know, do you think that changes the outcomes of an organization? That improves it? That it changes it?
Again, great follow-up question, and how I answered the previous two, right? That the cost to serve, right? Is that truly understood at the C-suite in any business, right? What are the components that drive it? What are the components that influence it, right? What are the elements within our control? And then where do we need to listen to the consumer or the customer in this case, right? Because there are certain elements that they have significant influence over that, are outside of our control. But the best we can do is to get it in to a forecast, understand, a certain bit of a predictable rhythm, and take it from there. So I think the answer to your question is that cost to serve element at the C-suite. That's my voice at the table, and probably one of the loudest.
Let me one last question in this section, and then I'll move us forward. But you know, at least personally, my biggest learning moments have been when I done something that the outcome wasn't as expected, and the reflection and learning I gained from that. So, would you be willing to share one in your case that you said, "Gee, this caused us a lot of pain, but down the road it made me better, made the company better"?
I think I think I'd answer that, feeding off my previous answer. Right there, in pursuit of truly understanding cost to serve, there is always, almost always, a balance with a service element, right? And so, in my experience, yes, in pursuit of a cost objective, right, service is often compromised, right? And understanding the level of tolerance for the business, the level of tolerance for the customer, and the balancing. Not all customers are the same. So I think yes, right. There have been initiatives where I have been involved in, and did I lean too heavily in pursuit of cost at the expense of service? Uh, I think there's definitely often
I
opportunities
can
to
sense and
recalibrate.
feel the scars bleeding a little bit, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
move us on. But yeah, it's good. It's always good. We all learn
Yep.
from those situations. So now a little bit different. So you have the also one of the things that make you unique. You've been on massive enterprises, but you've also been on some more regional ones and very fast growing retail models, right? So. From your perspective, what changes with scale when you're smaller versus bigger in a large organization, small organization?
Interesting question, right? Again, having seen it from both sides, right? The how nimble the tech stacks are that support the operations teams significantly vary. And I would say, right, early days, the gap was significantly bigger, right? I think the gap between mid-sized companies and large-sized companies is closing quickly on the tech stack from an operations point of view. But over my career, right, those gaps have been significant, right? So tech stack meaning, right, the WMS capabilities, the TMS, transportation warehousing or transportation management systems, right, planning systems, right, all very enterprise established large company tools, right, exist at significantly smaller scale, if at all, in those mid small size companies.
If you had to pick one of those, what do you think that big companies over-engineer or small companies underinvest? Is there one of those systems that you reference that you feel like is the one that always gets the brunt of the underinvestment or over-engineering?
I think that's a good question. I think, and my obsession with inventory, right? I immediately want to spend time in the systems that help shape and influence those cost of capital investments. Um, and to a large extent, right, the supply chain's voice at the table often gets prioritized lower on the list, and that presents an opportunity. So I think that's how I'd answer that.
I I I tend to agree with you. And you always had to sit in front of CFOs and reflect because the CFOs cash is king, right? So they're always the obsession on inventory. At the same time, the day-to-day forces you at deliver at cost and deliver on service. But definitely inventory. I understand your obsession 100%. Now let's tweak it a little because you also have the other dimension, not only big and large or regional or global, but you have the P-backed or founder-led environment, right? That is a different dimension. And startups, obviously, speed is paramount. How do you balance the difference between going fast versus being put more operational rigor in the operations?
Yeah, I think that's important, right? I think, oftentimes by the time I get an engagement with founders, they are actually moving at quite a clip, and often beyond their capabilities, beyond their expertise, and at certain operational thresholds that they've never seen before. One thing that I think, or one of the first things I talk to founders about is, what has historically been a potential obsession with perfection versus good enough,
Mhm.
right? And so, as you scale, right, you surround yourself with enough information, enough insights, to land on good enough, right? And so you can carry on and not lose momentum, right? If you were to sit and wait or refine for perfection, right, you're going to miss opportunities, right? And I think though that's a conversation I have very early with founders.
No, I fully agree with you. It's go slow to go fast is, versus perfection is always, yeah, you need to find the right balance. Now, on retail, you know, retail is complex, is unique, right? As you know it, and when you want to, most retailers have the vision of scaling X amount of times, 5 times, 10 times from the original base, right? So is there a certain capability that you think, hey, we can go faster on this, but we should put the rigor and the effort up front on this part of the retail? Which would that be?
I think in my experience, retail can, really only grows three ways. Retail grows with same store growth. That's, customer acquisition, extended service lines, added assortment, right? The
Mhm.
second way it grows is, organically, organic growth where if you're controlling it yourself, you need to make sure you've got very good levels of communication with the real estate hunters, right? The construction teams that are developing the properties, right? And then, the inventory planning and store operations teams that end up operating these, right? So that's the second way it grows. Right. And then the third way, probably a lot less frequent, but still a very much an opportunity is through M&A, right? And so, M&A in the retail world requires significant due diligence, right? And understanding of how how you can both immediately leverage your core operating scale, and then how to unlock the core operating scale over time, depending on the profile of the acquisition. So those things are very interesting, and they'll require different levels of engagement across the enterprise, and positive relations with those interdepartments that are authoring the scale.
So would you consider, is there any capability that cuts across those three different growth modes on retail that you think, hey, we can go fast on this, but we really need to be cautious and do this very deliberate first? Is there one that, or is it nothing to highlight from your perspective there?
I think there are I think very unique nuances across all three, but right, hey, how far are you from the source of supply, right? As you're building out stores, right, what does the supply chain need to make interaction between the supply chain and the store operations fluid and frictionless, right? So,
Hmm.
influencing the back dock and how do you design back docks for high turns, right? In the deep discount business where I spent quite a bit of time, you move volume and you move tonnage, right? So how do you, as you're designing stores, as you're acquiring stores, as you're moving existing stores volume beyond their legacy thresholds, right? Make sure the supply chain is part of those conversations so that to the extent you can influence it, you can design the resulting supply chain solutions to support it.
Okay. You're giving me the pivot to that through that question to move us into what I consider one of the key parts of our conversation, which is that understanding of how technology, the role that it plays as we grow different businesses and supply chain, right? And you led supply chains that have had a major digital and automation initiative, right? So when you're going through that heavy investment in technology, is there a specific technology that have truly helped you move the needle in retail specific? Is there one that you say, gee, absolutely, when we did the TMS or when we did the WMS, or I don't know, retail from your perspective, which one is the one that has moved the needle the most?
A great question. I think my experience has been largely grounded across retail execution in North America, and where I see the biggest opportunity and where I'm seeing probably the biggest lift right now is in warehouse automation, right? So case pick fulfillment into retail distribution is a very demanding operation to run. You need space, you need people, you need technology, all to work together. And with significant deficiencies across people availability, significant costs around space availability. And in the grocery retail space, you're doing it in three or four different temperature zones.
Mhm.
And that often presents a challenge, right, for the people and the technology side. So I think to answer your question, right, as North America is much more aggressively adopting case fulfillment automation, right? Those things, those projects that I've been involved with have been probably the most transformational in the legacy fulfillment operations, wherever and whenever they've been deployed. Um, yeah.
And I hear you, and I agree. Now, as I think or reflect, when senior leaders look at technology, they see them as enablers to do more with less or lower costs, etc. Right? But let's talk about when things go wrong, right? So when things go wrong, in your experience, they happen to be more because of what? Because the culture wasn't there for the technology or the processes or the data or even just the expectations. So what? Because not always technology delivers the results. So what is the major pitfall or that at
Yeah.
least you've experienced?
That's good. My experience, right? I think things go wrong for two reasons, right? You fail to capture a certain element in the blueprinting, right? And so, in the blueprinting phases of these types of, digital transformations, right? Make sure you spend the time to understand all the elements around the execution and the supporting processes that you will be digitizing. So failing in the blueprint. So that's one where, configuration, coding, and design are significantly deficient, right? And then the second one I think is all encompassing and probably a major element of any project, right? Change management, right? So do you understand, um, right, the change curve for those participants in and around this change? Do you understand, right, how to bring them with you, right, and how to keep them engaged, right? Do you have adequate subject matter expertise embedded in the operations? Um, have you have you highlighted and have you executed against, have you used the best talent within your organizations to lead these changes, or have you protected them to run the day-to-day operations, right? I've very strategically made decisions to pull out these experts and attach them to these projects. And some of the most successful operations we've had to struggle through day-to-day operations because our expert is leading the transformation. And that was a worthwhile investment.
That's so insightful, Tim, because, you know, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but you know, spend the time upfront on the blueprinting, make sure that everything is going to be designed with the right output as per design. But then change management, it gets so underestimated in at least in every project that I've been involved, and I've been guilty of that myself in a couple. So it's definitely that change management component is very, very important in any technology transformation. And ironically, you didn't mention neither of them is technology dependent, right? It's more process, is different things. So very insightful. Thanks. Um, so let me just pivot us towards one of the last sections. It's a little bit of, people, the feedback that I receive as I record a few chapters already in this podcast is people want to learn from my guests, right? So it's a little bit more honing your experience. So let's start with on your current role. You're an advisor to startups. When you're with them, what mistakes do you normally spot that these early startup supply chain tech companies make more often? So what is have you seen a pattern of mistakes that you can share?
Yeah, and I wouldn't call them mistakes, right? I think one of the first few questions that I exchange with founders is, what is the business problem that your solution is going to solve, right?
Mhm.
What is it, right? And I ask them to pitch me
Mhm.
as a former operator, right? What business problem are you solving, right? And how is it relevant to me as a former operator? Um, More often than not, um, they're not solving a problem; they're solving a symptom. And more often, and or um, they haven't sufficiently solved the problem they've identified, right? That would meet my satisfaction or as an operator, right?
Mhm.
So I double click and we go a little deeper into the conversation. Have you solved for this, right? Have you considered this factor, right? Are you aware of the competitors as it relates to this next problem that will come, as you face these challenges? So,
Definitely you and I we've been spending a lot of time together. I 100% agree that that's the approach, and that's where you really start separating where are the future jewels of startups versus um, an average startup, let's call it. So now that is when the solution is not fixing the problem, let's call it. But the opposite. What excites you now? There's so much in supply chain technology happening. You and I, we just spent earlier on the week, we were together in a show. We saw all kinds of things, right? So, is there one specific that you say, wow, this the technology here is? or this new operating model, or this, is there, and the name of the company is irrelevant. Is there a specific technology or solution that you see that you say, gee, this is super, super interesting?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing across the industry as we continue to move at almost warp speed when it comes to digitizing many of these processes or workflows or solves is just at the speed at which it can allow you to operate as an operator, right? Traditionally, I can reflect on my accumulated experiences, but man, what used to take me 3 days to do now takes 3 seconds, right? What used to take me 3 months to do is now taking 3 days, right? What used to take me 3 years to do, right, can maybe get done in 6 months, right? The speed of which supply chain problems are being solved and solutions are at least being shortlisted and right, your priority list is now being refined. You can do that so quickly now, and which is going to require a different pace at decision making, a different pace at prioritization, a different pace of resource allocation. And I think that is the next problem for many of us as operators.
Let me try to tie this up with your retail background, right? Let's say that you were going to build a retail supply chain from scratch today, that you had that the benefit of building from zero. Is there something that you say, oh, the first things I want to do is this, and that, or I would do it differently than I've done in this other place because whatever reason, apply it to retail. So combine your that supply chain expertise and technology to retail. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, I think retail has historically been slow to grow, slow to deploy capital, right? Very responsible and diligent as it relates to those things. And as a result of the speed, um, often um, what are legacy operations become a bit of a hindrance. And so, yes, so if I was to start from scratch, I'd be very, very focused on and leveraging today's tools, focused on the consumer, understanding what they need, when they need it, um, and what they need, right? And so, what that, and then translate that into the store, right? How does the store need to be shaped? How does the store need to be replenished, right? How does the store need to be appropriately serviced? And how the operations within the store, right? Are you always on shelf to capture that sale? All right, then back it into the supply chain, right? Transportation connects the stores to the supply, right? And historically, transportation has been the heaviest lift because it is the most fragmented traditionally in terms of how retail uses that function. So there are technologies today that can allow you to understand, model, twin, test, and deploy new methodologies as you apply transportation solution to the fulfillment process. So um, understanding transportation, will then allow you to iterate on, where should our fulfillment be located, right? It needs to be located to the source of labor. It needs to be located at the optimal cost to serve. And then it needs to be appropriately located um, to the sources of supply, right? So, where are the suppliers and where are they shipping from? So those things today, if we were to start from scratch, would look completely different, I would argue, than the retail infrastructure that you see today.
So, so the so the so based on that reflection, you basically are honing back on the concept of do your homework up front, understand the problem that you're trying to fix, and just try to make sure that it the solution fits and addresses that specific retail environment. Because as you said, your manufacturing landscape or your retail landscape, your end customers influence or should influence the design of your supply chain, right? So,
Yeah.
so, so, super insightful team. I appreciate it. You know, we're getting to the end of our conversation. It's been very insightful. You know, I'm trying to end always with the same question or similar question to all my guests. You know, so when you think momentum flow or forward-looking momentum flow, today, what gives you the most confidence that logistics, supply chain innovation, and really technology in general will continue to thrive for the years to come? Because right now we see a lot of action. What will keep that momentum going?
I am probably most proud to be from the supply chain industry and a practitioner within the space, more so in the last 3 years than I ever have been. Right? You've got early adopters that made the consumer aware that logistics and supply chain existed, right? You can follow your Domino's pizza through the app, right? That was very interesting, right? Every consumer today has had an Amazon experience in some way or another, right? And that digital experience is truly a reflection of what supply chain is and what logistics does, and the consumer has a significant appreciation for that, right? And then I'd end on, right, because of our experience through COVID and what became blatantly obvious as an underinvested industry as the supply chain of many businesses, right? A you're seeing a surgence of supply chain experienced professionals enter the C-suite with
Right.
significant experience behind them. And I think that that is going to be the momentum, right? Whether the supply chain has a seat at the table now, which is fantastic, but many supply chain professionals are becoming the C-suite leaders, right? In the corner office, running the enterprise, and I think that's an appreciation for us and what we've for our trade. So
Yeah, fully agree. There hasn't been any more exciting time to be a supply chain professional than the one that we're living today.
yeah,
Fully agree with you. Tim, this has been really a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you're so grounded, honest, and super practical. I appreciate that. Really, what stands out to me from today is how your consistency emphasizing the clarity, the trust, and the execution. Whether you're leading a massive retail operation, navigating a logistic complexity, or just advising the next generation of founders, right? So I sincerely appreciate that you share your experiences with us, with my audience, your perspective, and our common passion for this industry in this momentum flow. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
great. Thanks, Lisa, for your time today.
And to our audience, if today's conversation sparks a new way of thinking about logistics, leadership, or innovation, or the role supply chain is shaping our world, please subscribe to the Weekly podcast, share it, help us accelerate momentum. And as always, and until next time, I'm Luis Solana. Keep the momentum flow going. Thank you all.